Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alec, and as usual, I'm going to be here today to help answer any of your general or technical questions that may come up. But before we get started, I'm going to cover a couple of things you need to know about today's presentation. There's no dial-in number for attendees, so all audio will be streamed to you through your computer speakers or headphones, so please remember to adjust your volume there accordingly. You can submit questions or any technical issues you may encounter by clicking on the Q&A icon located on the right-hand side of your screen, labeled here on this slide with the top arrow. Just click that icon, type your question in, and click submit. If it is a content-related question, it may be pulled during the Q&A session if time allows. And if it's a technical question, I should have an answer for you that will appear on your screen shortly after you submit, so keep your eyes open for that. You can download a PDF of the slide deck right now in the handouts icon located on the right-hand side of your screen, labeled here on this slide with the bottom arrow. Just click there, and you should be able to pull down a PDF to take notes and follow along if you like to do that. Today's webinar is being recorded. You're going to receive a link to that recording in a follow-up email. In that same follow-up email from us at Workforce, you're going to have your HRCI and SHRM certification codes for today's event in there. So keep your eyes open for that. That will come a little over 24 hours after the conclusion of today's broadcast. So you'll have a link to the recording and your HRCI and SHRM certification codes in there for you. All right, so we have a great presentation lined up for you all today. So to get things started, I'm going to pass things over to Tom Boyle, Principal Consultant over at Cornerstone on Demand, to get things started. So, Tom?
Awesome, thank you so much. Let me just make sure that I've got control of the wheel here, and I do. And we'll go ahead and kick things off. Before I introduce myself and my counterpart here for today's call, I just want to give you a quick level set on the agenda. So we'll start with those introductions, and then we'll cover some basic industry trends before we dive into some more research, more specific research supplied by SmashFly, where we get to learn more about what some of the leaders are doing in terms of talent attraction, both from an external and an internal perspective. And then we'll open it up to questions and also provide you a really in-depth framework. And so one of the things that Alec mentioned just a few moments ago is the ability to download this presentation in a PDF version. We're going to go over some really detailed content towards the end, and it'll be helpful for you to have that as a takeaway from today's call. So without further ado, let me get into some of the introductions. So as Alec mentioned, my name is Thomas Boyle, and I'm a principal consultant here at Cornerstone. And my sole focus here at Cornerstone is recruiting and onboarding. And so I work with both existing and new clients to really help them better understand the industry trends and best practices that are impacting talent acquisition, and help them assemble a solution that meets their business needs. And so I'm really excited to be on today's call, and even more excited to be joined by Josh Swain, Vice President of Marketing at SmashFly. And Josh, will give you just a second if you want to introduce yourself to the audience today.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Thomas. So I'll be super brief with mine, but as you mentioned, the VP of Marketing at SmashFly. My job really is owning SmashFly's brand and our thought leadership in the market, which really are the cornerstones of our marketing strategy. Been with SmashFly for about 2 years, and I always kind of joke that my PhD in talent acquisition and recruiting came from being married to a practitioner myself. So that's my experience in this industry.
That's enough for me, for sure, and that's definitely PhD worthy. And I'm going to probably draw on some of that as we get going here. So thanks so much, Josh, for joining me today. I think we have a great session lined up. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to just kick off by talking about just some of the general industry trends that help set the stage for where we are today and where the market is from a candidate's perspective. And it really starts with how our work has changed, not only who's doing it, right? In some cases, depending on the type of organization you are, you have anywhere from 4 and sometimes 5 generations in your workforce now at once. And that really redefines the way that you have to approach that. And we'll talk a lot about those methods today. The type of work that's being done. We'll talk more about, the roles and the jobs that are changing. When work is being done, right? Work's being done around the clock. And then, of course, how it's being done with the rise of mobile has really caused and created more connectivity amongst our workforce. And so all of those things have really created, an age where skills have become really the new currency. And so if you looked over the next 3 years, 35% of the core job skills will change. I read a different stat recently that said 70% of the jobs that are in there today will change for children that are entering elementary school today, right? So those jobs don't exist today. for children that are just entering school. And this stat here is just what's happening over the next 3 years in terms of the core skills. And so what we're really witnessing is a global skills crisis. According to Manpower, 45% of global organizations are experiencing some level of difficulty filling positions. I think that number is around 42% at the U.S. level. So it's a problem that not only exists globally, but it also exists here in the U.S. PwC also reached out and surveyed CEOs, and you can see that 72% of them expressed concerns with their existing employees having the right skills. And so there's a problem out there not only filling the positions that we have, but also planning for that future and those skills change. And it's not just, kind of the tech roles as we all think about, right? It's really every single role in every industry that's out there. Everything from the introduction of, Uber drivers and new alternative types of positions that are around those types of trades to, kind of your existing traditional type of organizations changing. If you're following the news as of late, GM's a great example, right? They're going through some major changes within their own company. And some of those have a lot to do with that digital transformation and how they're changing the way that they're doing manufacturing from more of a machine-based or from more of a people-based to more of a machine-based. Josh, this is a topic we've talked about a few times, and one near and dear to you. Maybe you could just shed some light on kind of, well, I guess one, your exposure to GM and the connection there, and kind of your thoughts on just, what you see not only at GM firsthand from the inside, but just your general thought on how the industries are changing here.
Sure, yeah. So as Tom mentioned, my wife is actually a practitioner, talent acquisition practitioner at General Motors. So I've been, really closely exposed to everything that's going on with that company and the transformation that I think has been forced upon them. There's some proactive transformation there, obviously, and I think the company is being smart about how it's repositioning itself for the future. But even on this slide, like skilled trades, there's a shortage there. There are fewer people going into those skilled trades. The skills that are required for those skilled trades are different. Manufacturing is different. The machines that are used are different. So, that's certainly affecting them. But GM is becoming less of a manufacturing business. I think that's always going to be core to who they are, but it's becoming more of a data and a software engineering and a digital business. So, that transformation for them, it is difficult because their employer brand and kind of what they're known for as an employer is really tied to that manufacturing history. As they shift more toward becoming something more like Google or Tesla, obviously that fundamentally changes how they're perceived. It changes the talent they need for their business to grow, and access to that talent isn't as plentiful or as easy as it was in the past.
Yeah, that's a great insights, and I think here in Jacksonville, where I'm presenting from today, we have we weren't awarded one of the big Amazon fulfillment centers, but we have a fulfillment center here in Jacksonville, and I just think my nephew recently got a job there for the holidays, and I'm just thinking through even the way that traditionally you think about a warehouse job. Companies like Amazon have completely changed that. It's definitely more technology driven, even in the warehouse. So to your point, some of those skills trades have even evolved to the point where they've been, more technology driven at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So great points. Let's keep on trucking on here. A couple more slides on just some of the general stats, and then we'll transition into the next section of today's presentation. And really, if you ask those organizations, those same 45%, what were the drivers for those talent shortages? The number one would be lack of applicants, lack of experience, and then lack of required hard skills. And so these are some of the direct reasons that those organizations are equating. And what's fascinating to me is things like higher pay and some of those other items, they come down a little further on the list, even benefits, right? So it's not that they can't be competitive in those areas. There's just, for them, it's a true lack of candidates with skills and the experience to fill those newer roles. And what this has really helped do is really help to create a candidate-driven market. I mean, there's probably a lot of virtual heads nodding on the phone and saying, of course, but this is really the crux of what we're talking about. And not only if you ask recruiters, if you ask even corporate HR the same question, 86% agreed that it was a candidate-driven market. And what that's done is it really has changed candidate expectations. In the past, really candidates would do anything we asked them to. We could take a long, arduous paper application and stick it online and ask them to go through it no matter how long it took. The fact is today's candidates are no longer willing to bend over backwards to get through that process. And they expect a lot more, right? So 1 in 5 candidates, according to Career Builder, said that they weren't willing to complete an application that took them more than 20 minutes. So that's really where your starting point is, 20 minutes, right? There's other indicators on how many questions you're asking them, right? All of these things lead up to candidates having more control and higher expectations in terms of what the experience should be like. And when that experience is poor, it has a major impact. I mean, we can all talk here about, oh, well, if it's positive and the candidate has a great experience, they might tell a couple people, right? But I think what's more telling is what's going to happen when candidates have a bad experience, right? And 46% of them, according to the Talent Board, and if you're not familiar with Talent Board, they do some great research on the candidate experience, said that if the experience was negative overall, they not only wouldn't do things like refer or apply again, but they would take their product and their purchases elsewhere. And that has an impact on your bottom line. So whether you're selling goods or services or you're in the hospital, I mean, this has applicability across all industries in terms of the negative impact of a candidate experience. And really the major reason I bring that up is because when you go through and you're screening candidates, the fact is on average positions are getting anywhere from 100 to 200 applicants per job, right? Honestly, that's a light estimate. Many of you are getting way more than that, thanks to job boards like Indeed and some of the other free ones that are sending mass amounts of candidates. And the fact is 98% of those job seekers are eliminated by that initial pre-screening. And so the reason I bring that up is because you know from the previous slide that when the experience is bad, they're going to stop purchasing your products and it's going to have an impact on your bottom line. And in this slide, you can clearly see that if you have 200 people applying and 98% of them are being knocked out, you really need to be concerned not just about the 2% that are making it through. You need to be concerned about the experience of everyone that's not making it through as well. Because just because someone was not qualified for your position doesn't mean that you don't want them to apply, and it certainly doesn't mean you don't want them to purchase your goods or services again. So how do we get forward from here? I can tell you that what got you where you are today will not take you into the future. You can see from the dynamics that things are changing. Staying status quo is not a strategy, right? Our workforce is changing and our methods need to change too. And so if we looked at what candidates and employees' expectations really come down to, I'm going to really simplify this in this next couple of slides. It comes down to content, and what they're looking for is personalized, relevant, and genuine. And when it comes to the experience, they want an experience that's easy, transparent, and at least has the perception of fairness. And this is in terms of both candidates and your employees, because remember, even your employees, from the second they get hired, they're already considering another opportunity. They're already looking for opportunity either you provide it or someone else will. And so keeping in mind that previous slide's content and experience, let's overlay that with the hiring process today, right? If we look at the external talent along with the internal talent, and we look at that all the way from attract to plan, you can see that the same content and the same expectations are true. Both your employees and your candidate want personalized, relevant, and genuine content and an easy, transparent, fair process. And that goes across your entire life cycle. And so what we're going to really dive into today is what does that mean? And at the end of today's presentation, we're actually going to give you actionable steps that you can take in each and every phase of your hiring process to give them the content and the experience they're looking for. So with that, I'm going to start with really where the journey begins, and that's where you get to stop hearing me for a second, and I'll turn it over to Josh to just walk us through a few of the studies and research that SmashFly has done that's really applicable for our discussion today. Josh, are you seeing the slide okay?
Yep, I can see it.
And if you need to kick me, you just tell me. I'll try and be intuitive and move when you need me to.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll tell you when to advance to here, just to keep it consistent. So, yeah, I think to Tom's point, I think you made an interesting statement there earlier, and I think it was the perception of fairness. I think we all know that the recruiting process won't ever be completely fair and balanced in the sense that we can spend equal amount of time on every single candidate who comes in. That's just not realistic given the resources. But what can happen is we can deliver an experience that feels fair, where every candidate feels like they've been given the information they need, they have the transparency they deserve, and there is some sort of follow-up to their action. So if someone applies, they shouldn't just go into a black hole where they never have any sort of response. I think being turned down for a job is an okay thing, as long as you have kind of some explanation for why that happened, or that it's happened. So you're not just kind of hung in some sort of purgatory. But on this slide here, I think, the reality that candidates spend 1 to 2 months gathering info before applying shouldn't shock us. We do the same thing when we buy products and services online. And these channels that they use shouldn't be surprising either. But I think the really interesting one is the fact that they spend a lot of time on the company website. So they're not just looking at your jobs page through the ATS, which we know is typically not a very good experience. They're probably looking at the company too. What does the company do? What are its products what are the products that it sells? What is the company's mission? What does it stand for? What are the employee experiences like? Are there employee testimonials? So there's a lot of just information gathering that happens that, if we're not controlling it as employers, then you're kind of ceding control to the broader market. And if you don't control that message, then you can't control the experience, which Tom talked about earlier.
Yeah,
you can go to the next one. Yeah. So I think on this slide too, and Tom, I'd be curious on your perspective because I know you have an opinion here, but I think we tend to think about the candidate journey as a linear funnel. I think our industry has used that analogy before. It's nice to think of it in that clean kind of progressive journey where a candidate moves from stage to stage. But the reality and what we see with our customers, and I think Tom, I'm sure you would confirm with yours, is that candidates don't go in a straight line as they're thinking about applying. They'll bounce around to a few different channels. They'll certainly network with their friends who either work for the company or who know someone that does. They might join your talent community where they're getting kind of a separate experience that way. Maybe eventually they apply to your job or they apply through LinkedIn and then they get hired. But it's this really kind of odd interconnected web of experiences that I think it can feel difficult to get your hands wrapped around, but there's a few simple things that can be done to make sure that each of those stages or interactions that a candidate has with your company is a positive one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think, the illustration is, it's meant to be a little archaic, right? Because, to your point, candidates aren't following the same path every time, and it's this perfect thing that you can plan out.
Right.
To me, what this really points to is just the need to really diversify the method in which you reach candidates, and understanding their behavior is really where that starts, right? And knowing that it's not just going to be this linear path, that candidates are really relying on a lot of other supplemental content, and they're taking their time. To that previous slide, 1 to 2 months. I think that's predominantly on the professional side. That's a long time. And so, to your point on the earlier slide, if you're not controlling the message, someone else is. And so, to me, this slide just speaks to, don't be afraid to diversify what you're doing and take the time to really understand candidates' behavior instead of just kind of assuming that, what you've been doing status quo wise is going to work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk a lot about right time, right place, right job.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to get your hands wrapped around. So you have to kind of be prepared that candidates will kind of move in and out of different stages of the funnel or the journey. And again, to your point, I think being able to see that behavior or kind of understand it at least is critical.
Big time.
All right, so here I think from the company perspective, where are companies kind of looking for the different types of candidates? So I think we tend to think about passive and active only. And obviously with passive candidates, you might source on LinkedIn, you might have a talent community or talent network, you go to social sites, there might be niche content sites or niche job boards that are more targeted to a specific audience. With active candidates, obviously it's the typical job boards. I think there's a network now of 2,000 plus job boards that we work with. I'm sure there are more than that. And those are good channels for those. But I think if we progress to the next slide here, or we're already on the next slide, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
but there's that third category of employees as well. And I think, Tom, you can speak more to this. But yeah, I think we often forget about that group. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I think that's massive, right? Because, I spoke earlier, and there's some great stats I'm happy to share. But, the biggest, most info stat I could share with you is that the vast majority, I think it's a 72%, I think is what the number was. I'll have to dig it out before the end of the call. 72% of your existing employees are looking for new opportunities within the first 90 days of joining your company, right? And if you looked at the reason why people are leaving, it's because of opportunity, right? And so it's great that we want to keep filling that top of the funnel, so to speak, and finding great candidates. But again, if you're not providing that opportunity for your existing employees for growth, then you're really spinning your wheels. And so, again, think about your active talent search or even your passive talent search and how it should cover more than just kind of those external streams, and should really be all encompassing and in truth have employees as part of the upfront strategy. They're a talent that you already have at your disposal. And in many cases, it's easier to backfill an entry-level position and promote from within, especially with someone that already gets your culture and can make a big impact. So I think this is probably the biggest shift that I hope to see companies continue to make over the next 12 to 18 months, especially as the talent shortage continues to kind of grow. The people inside your company know the skills, right? They know your systems, they know how things work, and so hopefully companies will start to look there more and use that as part of a solid strategy.
Yeah, totally agree. I think too, like the just one last point on that, but I think obviously there's within every company you have high potential and high performing employees, and the worst thing that can happen is for those employees to walk. Again, using my wife as an example in General Motors, there's an enormous amount of effort placed internally to make sure that those folks have a clear career path and that they feel engaged with the company, because it's easier to backfill their old position where there may be a junior level employee than it is to hire somebody for where they're going. So if you just think about it that way too, and you really find a way to engage those people and retain those people, it makes your recruiting strategy to backfill their positions a little bit simpler.
Yeah, great point. I even met with a client last week and said, they said, well, we have career fairs just for internal employees.
Yeah.
And I thought, what a great idea, right? Why limit that to just external people? Be more direct with the strategy for your existing employees. And so I thought that was a great way of doing just that. And then we'll talk later, but really what it takes to really be successful there is buy-in from everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
About that.
All right, so I think now we're going to get into kind of this research that SmashFly has performed, and I just want to give a little bit of background on the research. So every year we publish a report that benchmarks talent acquisition and recruitment marketing activities within the Fortune 500. We really started the report because we noticed that there was a lot of low-hanging fruit that could improve the candidate experience and building pipeline and optimizing recruiting, but we didn't see companies adopting those tactics. So, really basic things like making sure the career site was optimized for SEO, making sure that everything was mobile friendly, publishing employee stories on a career site. Those things weren't really a thing a few years ago. So we wanted to kind of dig in and start benchmarking those tactics and activities among the Fortune 500 and really assess whether or not there's any progress over these next few years toward, again, really basic things that can make a big difference on the candidate experience, but then some more advanced tactics and using that as a method to kind of assess the maturity of the growth within recruitment marketing. So what we're looking at here is our tactics adopted in 2018 by the majority of the Fortune 500. I think none of this is terribly shocking. Again, things I've mentioned that I think have been on the tops of many recruiting teams' minds, making sure that the experience is mobile friendly, that the jobs and the company's brand is actually showing up in Google when somebody searches. The use of employee stories, especially video stories, has increased significantly. So these are all things that I think it's great to see that these things have been adopted. But if I'm being honest, these are tactics that should be table stakes right now. So I think it's actually surprising that, for example, the career site is optimized for Google for Jobs. We have less than 60% of companies whose sites qualify for that. So there's still an enormous amount of room for improvement here. If you go to the next slide, Tom.
Sure. Whoops. A little too click happy here.
That's right. Yeah. And then what we're showing here is our tactics that are adopted by the minority of the Fortune 500, so less than 50%. And I think this is where it gets really interesting. So again, really simple things like having a job alert sign up, outlining the application process on the career site, having for example, like an automated trigger to remind candidates who dropped off the application process to complete their application, having a Glassdoor widget on the career site so that potential candidates can get a sense of what the company's about and what the employee experience is like. All really, again, fairly basic things, fairly straightforward things that don't require a ton of effort to execute, are really being underutilized by the Fortune 500. You can go to the next one here. I think the one thing that was super positive, and this is somewhat self-serving from SmashFly's perspective, because we do obviously sell software that helps with this, but I think philosophically, we just genuinely believe that whether you use us or use somebody else, this is an important tool to have. But the use of a talent network or a talent community, that usage or that adoption has grown a little bit over the last few years, which is certainly a positive thing to see. At the same time, similar to the theme from the last two slides, it's still only at 35%. So, almost 2/3 of the Fortune 500 do not have any way to engage their database outside of maybe automated job alerts from the ATS.
Craziness.
It is, right?
It really is. I mean, especially, I can't help but go back to that same 98% number.
Right.
I mean, I ask clients all the time, how many times have you reached back out to those 98% of the candidates? Well, never.
Right.
We're just going to the next position. I'm like, never. Like, that's, that's like the worst answer. But.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, like we see within our customer base that I think it's about a 90% drop off once somebody clicks apply, right? So typically companies have paid media spend, or they're unloading a bunch of their budget on job boards and Indeed and wherever else. So they're paying for that traffic to come to their site. They're paying for those applicants, and when they drop off, if they don't have some mechanism to capture those people, because we do know, it's a real problem. You're just going to spend that money again once you have to fill another rec. So it's Josh, before we get into this next slide, I know that sometimes you and I, like, we get caught up in our own tech terminology, right? And I know from recruiting, like, that changes all the time. And sometimes talent network, talent community, talent pipeline, insert talent, whatever, can get a little confusing. Before we dive into this one, do you want to just take a second, just for the broader audience, just explain a little bit of kind of the concept of talent network, just so everyone's on the same page with some of the stats? Sure. So at the most basic level, we view a talent network as giving candidates a very simple way to raise their hand. So obviously with an application, there's a certain amount of compliance and there's a process that needs to be followed. So there's some limitations on that experience. But with a talent network, the beauty of that is similar to how you might go to an e-commerce site and give them your email address just to opt into their newsletter or to offers they might have. It's the same idea for a talent network. Someone isn't ready to apply and they're a passive candidate. They might just give you their email address, first name, last name, area of interest, and a phone number. It could really be whatever information you want, but it's giving them a really simple way to start a relationship with you. And then from there, you can do a lot of different things with that information. You can kind of nurture somebody over a period of time. You can send them job alerts. There's a lot of different communications that can go out from the talent network, but in its simplest form, it's just a very unobtrusive way for somebody to raise their hand and say they're interested. Yeah, that's just a perfect explanation. So thanks for that. I think that's a great segue into kind of these stats and where companies are at. Yeah. So the one thing with the report is we used to give grades. So we used to actually call it a report card, but we used to give A, B, C, D, F grades based on the adoption or the usage of certain tactics. What we found is that the grades were a little bit limiting, so we just started to use benchmark data instead. So the top 10%, top 20%, et cetera. What we found when we looked at the highest performing companies, and when we say highest performing companies, we mean companies whose we don't have access to every company's data, hiring data, to know how if they're filling jobs faster for less money, et cetera. But we know for sure what we can see from the outside. So what sort of experience are they giving candidates? And that's really where the grade comes in. And 76% of companies that we deem top performing, so again, those top 10%, they all have a talent network. And if you consider back or think back to that slide earlier, and you look at the entire Fortune 500, that's only 35%. So it's really a lot of the cream is at the top here, where these companies that really stand out are embracing this. But I think the more interesting stat here on the right is 89% send monthly communication that have a talent network. So it's not just having a talent network, it's actually using it to engage that database that you have. If you don't, it just becomes another black hole, just like the ATS often does. Now, this one, I know, Tom, you have a very visceral reaction to. I think it would probably make a lot of us sick to think about it this way, just as candidates and consumers ourselves. Now, it's great that companies have a talent network. The reality is that a lot of them aren't using it or aren't using it well. So the really shocking number is 95% of companies with a talent network only share jobs. So maybe they are sending monthly communications, but it's just job alerts. Now, why is that a problem? If you go back to Tom's earlier points about how the dynamics of the talent market have changed and how expectations from candidates have changed, the level of unemployment, we know that a huge percentage of the market is passive, and they're looking for something different from companies. And jobs really are not it. They're looking to find out more about the brand, about the company, what it stands for. So when you only share jobs, that really is cutting out a significant portion of the really attractive talent market. And then the middle stat here, 41% of companies send personalized job recommendations. So what that means on the flip side is 59% aren't. So you might sign up for marketing jobs, but you could get, midnight shift supervisor jobs, or you might get nursing jobs, or finance jobs, all things that are irrelevant to you. And we know from consumer behavior that when something isn't personalized, people either tune it out or they'll unsubscribe. The last stat here, 33% of companies with a talent network or job alerts never send communications after confirmation. So again, the whole point of the talent network is to provide a different experience and to kind of eliminate this black hole that the ATS sometimes creates, or the processes behind the ATS creates. But unfortunately, what we're doing now is we're creating a second black hole.
Yeah, which is scary, right? Because honestly, many of us are just digging out of the, that perception that our experience is, a black hole like everyone else is, and they're never going to hear back, right? And so there's a big investment that's made in this type of technologies, and even to make your own career sites better, right? But if you're not doing anything with it, which is clearly what this shows, right? I mean, very, very little. The last one blows me away the most. Like 33% just aren't doing anything. Like they bought it and they're just not doing anything with it. Right. It goes back to the framework, and it goes back to something Josh said a couple of times: personalized, right, and relevant and genuine content. Yeah. When you're putting that content out there, both as a consumer, you feel different. If you're buying goods and products and it's targeted, we all feel like, wow, that they know me. They know exactly what I want. Exactly the type of products. Anyone get a targeted thing where you're like, ooh, man, they know me. I want all three of those T-shirts and, that pair of pants, whatever it is. We're really doing the same thing here. These candidates are taking the time to give you information. And I know that some of us get hundreds and thousands of candidates, right? And we disposition them and we kind of hope they apply again. But that doesn't happen without effort. And talent communities and distributing content, all of these things can not only help with candidates coming back and having a steady pipeline for your next position, it's also going to reap rewards in terms of them being connected to your consumer brand, them being connected to the organization in a different way than someone that got no content, no contact from them, right? I mean, it can't feel so self-serving and one-sided. I mean, candidates read right through that. So those are all really good points.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that.
All right, a couple more slides, and then we're going to dive into kind of really a nice actionable framework for everyone to take away. So let's keep on keeping on, as they say.
Yeah, and I think this is where we start to get into kind of the takeaways here, like the tips that, I think this can seem like a lot of work, but I can tell you as a guy who runs a marketing team of just 5 people, it's not as difficult as it sounds. And with a few simple steps, I think there are a lot of things that can be done very, very quickly to improve the experience that, quite frankly, right now is not a very good one. So the first one here is the right content for the right people at the right time. We talked about the talent community being a black hole, or the ATS being a black hole. I think from our research, the fact that not a single nurture tactic is being adopted by more than 50% of the Fortune 500 companies is just shocking. Honestly, what that means is these companies have these huge databases of people, and they have people raising their hands saying they're interested, and yet they do nothing to keep them warm. So again, if someone's not actively looking for a job right now, or maybe they don't meet your qualifications for a job, that doesn't mean you shouldn't continue. You shouldn't have a relationship with them. And the easiest way to do that is again, capture their information on your career site. The next time they come back, have jobs personalized to them, have content that's relevant to them. Send them a monthly newsletter where they can kind of find out a little bit more about your company. So as they develop and they evolve, and maybe their readiness changes, they're going to think of you first. The next one is the process needs to be easy and inclusive. So again, it shocked us that only 1/3 of the Fortune 500 have a way to capture talent lead information without having to apply. I mean, that's not that's fixable. And we know too that most people are not going to go through an application process, especially when it's, to Tom's point earlier, longer than 20 minutes. They can sniff that out very quickly. So again, there's a huge opportunity here to stop the talent network or the CRM or whatever system you use for capturing leads from becoming that black hole for candidates. Don't just offer the talent community as an option, but do something with it.
Yeah, great advice.
So I think here, and I think you can click, I think there's some animation here that'll bring this up, but there's, again, the communication disconnect, I think is pretty simple to sum up, but it's really all about delivering targeted, relevant content. So again, we found that 59% of companies don't provide any transparency into the application process. There's an opportunity to use things like artificial intelligence. I mean, chatbots are all the rage, and I think a huge buzzword. But that tool has a very specific application and a very useful one in terms of just answering very basic questions that most candidates have. I think a lot of the people on the phone here have probably been through the experience of a recruiter having to answer the same question over and over again, from a bunch of different candidates. There's automation and there's technology today that can kind of solve for that.
Oops. That's
okay, yeah, and I'll get through this one quickly. So I hate to be brash, but the truth is most career sites are still boring. Most companies don't have employee stories or videos on their career site. And in the age of social media and people feeling like they want transparency and visibility into who the company is and what it stands for and what it's really like, the meter to kind of sniff out inauthenticity is very high. So, taking your employees, taking your happy, engaged employees and leveraging them as a marketing tool is a very simple win. And then in terms of social channels, I think still today, most companies are maybe using their corporate social media and just kind of throwing jobs out there. But social media as a channel, can be extremely effective in talent acquisition too. And we're seeing customers, Intel's probably the best example for us, but creating dedicated social channels for their careers, and not just sharing jobs, but sharing useful content, tips for how to polish up your resume, or different paths within Intel that you can take, or cool things that they're working on. But just, again, social media, it's free. If you dedicate just somebody internally to doing that, spending an hour or two a week on it, you can get some value out of it.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, of just about consistency, right? Just stick with it.
Yeah. And that last one here, I think, just again, looking at the grades by Glassdoor. So we did kind of cluster the high performers versus the low performers, just to see where they mapped in terms of Glassdoor reviews. And not surprisingly, I guess, is the fact that the high performers tend to have a higher recommendation score on Glassdoor, and then a higher rating as well. Now, some of that, I don't want to say that it's correlation and causation, or that causation is correlation, but the reality is that the companies that kind of market their brand and live their brand and set clear expectations for their candidates tend to hire happier people who are more aligned with who the company is. And then when they get inside of the company and that mission, vision, values, and everything the company stands for is what was marketed, I think you end up with happier employees. And I'm sure on the internal mobility side too, there's a whole nother component to this, but there is some connection here.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So We're going to spend the last few minutes that we have really walking through some good actionable items that, if you haven't already done so, should give you a nice framework and some items to look at both on the content and the experience side for both external and internal talent, both through the attract and the retain phases. So we're going to kind of tag team this together. I'll ask Josh to take on a couple of these, and I'll take on a few of these. And remember, you do have the handout, so I know this may be a little difficult to see on your computer screens. Just remember, you do have that available to you. So we'll start with the engagement framework, and we'll start again with the attract side, and we'll start with content. And the purpose here is just, again, to give you some nice actionable takeaways in each of these areas that you can take back to your own business. So Josh, you want to lead us off? And I'm going to go ahead and just build these because it can be a little bit distracting, and I'll let you talk through all those boxes real quick.
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, again, like Tom said, these are meant to be relatively simple things that you can do, maybe not tomorrow, but certainly within the next month or quarter to change kind of how you present yourself to candidates. But the first one here is create multiple career site landing pages for targeted audiences. So again, if you think about this, it might be a job family. It might be if you have a diversity and inclusion initiative going internally, it's creating a landing page with messaging that's specific to that type of candidate that you're trying to attract. The reason there, again, goes back to personalization and having some relevancy in the content you present. The second one, be specific with your job descriptions. So again, I think job descriptions are low-hanging fruit. Most are frankly pretty terrible. But talk about what's in it for the person who you're trying to attract. Not just the requirements that exist. What will they do on the job? What will they impact? What sort of projects will they work on? Maybe have a video of the hiring manager talking about what it's like to work on that team. The third one here is clearly outline your interview process online. Again, this is something that you can have a landing page on your career site for, or you could use a chatbot for. We have one that we use or that we offer, but there are a lot of them out there that can be more or less pre-programmed to answer a lot of those basic questions and provide the transparency without your recruiters having to get on the line. On the lower left here, power your career site and talent pools with genuine content. So the genuine content is the key here. Again, job alerts are great. They can be a good way to convert active candidates, but really showing who you are. Send out a branded monthly newsletter. Send out a video of an employee, a day in the life of an employee. That type of content that really shows someone who your company is or what it's like to work for you is an extremely powerful way to convert passive candidates. In the middle here, share what candidates can expect from the screening process up front. So again, that's transparency, right? It's really saying this is what you're gonna get. We're gonna follow up with you in a week. And when a candidate knows that, they feel like it could be a week or it could be 10 days. But when they know what to expect, it really changes the experience they have. Last one here, provide interview team members relevant interview guides. So really, this gets to not having just kind of a standardized process for every single type of candidate, but working through, the specific job family or the skills you're trying to hire for, and having content for your hiring managers and your interviewers that's relevant to that job.
Yeah, I mean, that one goes back to not only kind of a no-brainer for your staff, but your candidates are still interviewing you at the same time. So they don't want people to ask them the same questions in the interview that aren't relevant to them. So I think that's an important one.
Yeah.
So let's keep that same theme rolling here, and we'll go right on through the other half of this, and we'll talk a little bit about the internal talent, and I'll build some of these so we can start with the top layer here. So starting where Josh left off on the top there, provide candidates as much detail as possible. And that's the remaining candidates. So the candidates, the 98%. And, that's important because, again, no one wants to, feel like they were getting knocked out by a machine, right? Or get a really generic message. Remember that for candidates, this is a big deal. It's a job change for them, or maybe they're even unemployed. So, be respectful, provide them as much information and as much detail as you can about why they were disqualified. And that's a great time to also invite them to the talent community or to other openings. The next one, educate new employees and managers on internal mobility. This is an important one because a lot of times when it comes time to, reaching into your internal talent pool, you get a lot of resistance from your managers. And so I think it's really important to educate employees and managers on why it's important so that you can really foster that from within, as opposed to, really coming at that from the side and waiting on your actual employees to apply. The last one up top there, I forgot to mention, educate employees and manager on growth plans, right? When employees and managers are more connected to your overall growth plans, they're more likely to see that internal mobility and those career paths as something more positive. And again, provide employees visibility into career paths. And so same thing, your employees, they want to be able to go out and let you know where they want to be in 3 or 5 years from now. And so it's really important to give employees that opportunity to express not only where they want to be, but also see what it takes within your organization to get to those career paths. Because again, most people don't want to leave your company. They'd love to stay. And if you look at why they leave, it's related to opportunity, skills, room for advancement, those types of things. So all of those things can really help with the retention of existing employees. Along the bottom, we'll cover these 4 boxes really quickly. Invite remaining employees to join a talent community, right? I mentioned that just a moment ago. If you're disqualifying, 98 candidates, there's no sense in just telling them thanks, but no thanks. Many of them were qualified, just not the most qualified. So make sure that you invite them to jump and join a talent community where they can get information about what you're doing in the community, what jobs are open, what career fairs you're having, all of those pieces of content that Josh and I were talking about a few moments ago. Capture the employee's career interest during onboarding. This is a really easy, practical step. You want to know where your employees want to be? Ask them, right? Don't assume that your employees just want to stay in customer service or whatever role. One of the really quick ways of doing this is just ask the candidate when they apply where they'd like to be in 5 years, what role they want to move to, right? That information can be really helpful when it comes time to, looking at your existing employee population, both from a flight risk, but then also from just an open opportunity perspective. The next one on there, create dedicated time for job shadowing. This is something that we do a really good job at here at Cornerstone. We have what's called the development day, and that allows everyone in the organization every quarter to take a complete day really to shadow someone else in a job, right? So that they understand what that takes and what's entailed, or to host a session of their own on a specific job. This is a great way of, again, really fostering internal mobility from the inside. And that's what it's going to take for managers to really start nominating employees and saying, hey, I got a great employee. I don't want to lose them. We want to get them in another position, those types of things. So create dedicated time for employees to explore other paths that they want and maybe not completely know about within the organization. And then the last one is that tip that I mentioned earlier. I got from a client. He said they were holding internal career fairs. And so, there's nothing wrong with, holding that, once a quarter, have an internal career fair where managers and employees know about it. It's something you publicize and make a big deal about, promoting from within and providing that opportunity. So those are some great ways from a content perspective on what you can do to deliver meaningful, relevant content to, both external and internal talent. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. I know it's a little tough to read on the slide. And now what I want to do is I want to bounce and cover really the second half of this. The other part of what we've been talking about is not only delivering the right content at the right time to the right people, but also what is that experience and what should that look like? And so I'll turn it back over to Josh. I'll just build the top 3 here for you so we're not overwhelmed. If you want to take those first 3, and then I'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to tack on to that last one. I just love the idea of the internal career fairs. I think it's so easy to focus on the external all the time, but what a great way, honestly, to open those doors and make employees feel comfortable talking about that. I just love that. Yeah, so the first thing here is create external talent communities for key roles. I say key roles because I think a talent community shouldn't just be this huge, massive database that where you send the same message to the same person all the time. To the same people all the time. So it really should be personalized. It should be targeted to that person. Nestle Purina is a great example of a customer of ours that does this, where they have talent communities set up for specific job families. So they'll have one set up for sales, one for data science, one for hourly workers, manufacturing, and each of those pipelines or each of those talent communities get different experiences. They get something that's more targeted to exactly what they care about, and I think that's critical. The second one is allow candidates to see where they are throughout the hiring process. Again, transparency and personalization, right? They're not just one piece in a big machine. They're somebody that is getting a true one-on-one relationship with the business.
Yeah, remember the number one frustration on the stat was lack of transparency, not knowing where they are in the process, and that's something that, from an experience perspective, technology should solve instantly. So.
Absolutely, automation there, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be where your hiring managers, your recruiters are reaching out to every single person to disposition them or to tell them where they are.
Yeah.
There's no reason why automation can't solve that for you.
Yeah. Good segue to the next one, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Scheduling is another one. I think scheduling's a task that I think requires a lot of time from recruiters, syncing calendars, making sure that hiring managers are available, setting up recruiting or interviewing days. Frankly, there's a million scheduling tools out there. We have one, but there are countless free tools that can help you with this. So it doesn't just help your hiring managers, doesn't just make your recruiters more efficient, but it truly does deliver a better experience for candidates. Make talent communities a native part of your process. I think this is, again, just getting to the fact that you start viewing this as a way to capture leads and really just ingraining it into the experience. That way you don't have candidates who aren't ready to apply just dropping off and disappearing. Don't ask for more than what you need when you need it. I love this point. I think it's spot on. If any of us went to an e-commerce site and they asked us to fill in 20 fields just to get a discount, most of us wouldn't do it. Typically what those e-commerce sites are looking for is just your email address and they'll give you 20% off. It's a very similar thing here where the application process might take 20 minutes, but you could offer somebody the opportunity to raise their hand and say they're interested in learning more about you just with their email address, first name, last name. Share interview feedback with candidates. Again, super simple. This is another thing that can happen through automation sometimes. But once somebody reaches the interview stage, there's no reason why recruiters shouldn't be able to spend their time on this. And if you automate a lot of the other stuff, then they should have time, even more time for this.
Yeah, great point. And that, don't ask for more than what you need when you need it is just huge. I think there's some other great research that Indeed has done just around number of questions and tying that to drop off. The fact is, right around 20 questions total, and I'm not talking like screening questions, I'm talking fields, is really kind of the sweet spot. If you keep it less than that from an application process, we're not even talking talent pool. Mm-hmm. Anything above that, the drop off is significant. Anything over 20 questions on a application is going to be around 75% drop off. And so it's pretty massive in terms of experience. And so that's why I think it's even more important to not say, give me your, life history when 98% of candidates aren't making it past the screening stage. So capture what you need to get screening, right? Don't capture all this unnecessary information. Candidates are very, very skeptical these days with so much data on the internet to give you really anything. And so it's part of that's just being respectful of that as well.
Totally agree.
So a couple more, and then we'll drive it home and leave just a couple minutes for any questions that might be out there. I'll just reveal these top four here and go through these. The first one is, wait to disposition. I know that a lot of us say, well, I just want to disposition the candidate immediately, and we could, I could probably have a healthy debate on pros and cons to both sides of this. My general feeling is that you should wait to disposition candidates when you're doing it through the system, because if a candidate is dispositioned the second that they hit submit, based on your machine, in most cases, they will come back and try and say, well, you know what? My friends call me Tommy, not Tom, and I'm going to use my other Gmail account, and I'm going to answer that question a little differently because I know that's what knocked me out. And so what I would say is, one, you don't want candidates coming back in trying to game the system because they feel like they were disqualified by a machine. And two, you don't want candidates to feel like they were disqualified by a machine. You want them to think that you gave it some consideration. It goes back to that perception of fairness. So I would wait if you can, at least a little bit of time, and don't make that immediate. The next point here is really onboarding. Start before day one and continue beyond week one. I really say beyond 90 days, right? But onboarding, especially as you make that critical step from, okay, I was showing the candidate all this love to now they're an employee, really make sure that that's a hands-on approach, because sometimes for companies we work with, it could be a month or longer before someone starts. And so making sure your onboarding process starts the second that they're actually hired, even though they maybe not walked in yet, the second they accept the offer, and then run that right on through that first, I would say the first 60, 90 days, right? Hold your recruiter accountable at the same time. Have your recruiter potentially meet with your new hire after 90 days, right? How is is the position, everything I told you it would be? Is it meeting your expectations, right? There's different ways that you can really kind of continue this on and keep employees engaged well beyond, that initial, okay, you're hired, now wait till you start, right? We want to keep them engaged the whole time. The next one I really like is measure managers on employee mobility, right? Because when, managers are measured on all kinds of other things like around productivity, a lot of that has to do with retaining their employees and not with fostering internal mobility. So think about ways that, you can measure managers and even incent them to really foster more of an internal mobility type of attitude. So they're nominating and talking to their teams about, moving and on to different positions. The last one here at the top, create internal talent communities. Again, no brainer. You have them for external talent, you should have them for internal. And in there, you should give them information around, how the company is growing and changing and how they fit in. That's a big one, right? Don't just leave it up to them because they're employees to find the information they need on why they should stay with you and what their next career path is. Okay, we'll finish off with these bottom four here. The first one, when dispositioning candidates, it's that 98%. Try and make it personal, beyond inserting name here. If you can give some level of disposition reason or some type of personal message in there, at a minimum for your second tier candidates, right? If you're not going to do it for, all 98 of them, look at the ones that maybe did make the initial cut and do something a little more personalized for them. Again, that will go a long way. The next one, paperwork should be online, easy, and not redundant. Like nothing says tech savvy like handing a new hire a stack of papers. So consider automating that onboarding process. So again, they feel like you're a modern tech savvy company. It'll streamline the process. It'll again create a better experience and also lead to a faster time to productivity in general. Provide continuous opportunities for learning. I mentioned earlier some of the things that we do here at Cornerstone around our development day, where employees are given a day every quarter, and it's intentional, and it's from our CEO all the way down, right? And it really has to be something that the whole company embraces. And so embrace continuous learning amongst your employees, because again, one of the main reasons people leave is for other opportunities. So give them that opportunity in-house, and they will stay with you longer. And then the last one, distribute openings and news to internal talent first. Right? I ask this of a lot of clients, are you distributing your jobs to your employees before you go external? And many of them say, no, we're not. We're doing it at the same time. Or our employees just go to the external site and apply. That's not a great strategy. Your employees should get first dibs on the positions, give them a couple days. I've seen customers give them a week, and then distribute them externally. Really gives your employees the sense of loyalty that you're giving them. And you'll see great returns on that activity as well. Anything to add there, Josh? I know that was a lot that we went through.
No, I mean, honestly, I think the internal piece is just so critical because, it really eases the burden on the external piece. But thinking about this holistically as an experience all the way through, I think it's sometimes forgotten or just overlooked where, you might have a great candidate experience and maybe even the application experience is pretty decent. But then as soon as somebody gets to onboarding and past the first 90 days, it just becomes, I think things tend to fall apart either because they've been ignored or, any other number of reasons. But these are just some really simple things that I think if you have these things in place, it dramatically improves the experience for the employees, which then, creates tools for you to market externally. When you've got happier employees who are more engaged, you feel like they have a career path internally, that can all be leveraged as a marketing tool externally as well.
Yeah, great points. So we got just a couple minutes. Man, there were some good questions that poured in. I tried to chat a few folks back to kind of get a couple answers. You're certainly welcome to reach out to Josh and I after the call individually. We're happy to answer any questions related, but I'm going to try and see if there's a couple out here I can cherry pick really quickly. Related to candidates, candidates typically call us if they aren't selected and a position remains on our career site, wondering what you think is the best practice. And so, I get this a lot from clients because sometimes they have what we call, you might refer to as an evergreen position. Well, we're always hiring for customer service, so the position always stays up. Or, you've disqualified them, right, and the position does stay up because you haven't filled it. Again, this goes back to personalization. If you just give them the blanket, sorry, no thanks, and they're disqualified and they see the position, they're going to feel really insulted. Like, okay, I wasn't even good enough to get a personalized response. So If you're getting a lot of those candidates coming back to you and saying, hey, the position's still out there, try and give them a little bit more detail in there. Maybe even change your form letter, decline template to be a little bit more specific around, hey, the position may remain open as we finalize on a remaining candidate, or something along those lines, so that candidates aren't automatically calling you. So that would be my tip there. We got 2 more minutes according to my clock, so I'm going to get every last second out of this I can. Sometimes a job seeker applies multiple times at the same company but gets rejected every time he or she applies. How can we make sure this person still has a great experience? How are companies losing potential top candidates due to ATS inability to capture key traits? Different question. So lots of points. I call that the serial applicant. I think we all have them. No matter what, they try and come back through, and you're right. You still do want to provide them a great experience. I think for me, look, it's going to be hard to deter them. But what I would say is that's where a talent community is perfect for someone like that. Like, hey, we notice you're applying to a lot of great positions. What we really want to do is focus you, and here's some talent communities where you can really find out, maybe where your passion is, or what positions would be best for you before you apply, or things like that. Maybe redirect them to the talent community, and then if they're getting regular kind of updates, that may help. That may help them kind of resist from applying to every single thing they see. I don't know if that's going to help completely, but good luck with that. I think everyone wants to know a solution to that one besides just blocking them.
Yeah.
I think we're right at the top of the hour. I wish I could get to more of these. There are some really great ones. I so appreciate all of the participation and great questions. Again, Josh and I are happy to answer any of these questions offline and help anyone along their journey. But for now and today, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Alec to close things out.
All right, Josh and Tom, thank you for taking the time to be with us. Yeah, we are out of time. So I also want to thank Cornerstone on Demand for sponsoring this event. This was part 2 in a 3-part series, and we have the part 3 coming up here in December. So I want to thank them for sponsoring. It's been a pleasure working with them on this series. I also want to thank everybody in the audience for your participation. We had a ton of questions come through. And unfortunately, we couldn't get to them all. But if you enjoyed the webinar, please take a moment to fill out our post-event survey, which is going to appear right as this webinar ends. Your feedback does help us improve our events, especially going forward into 2019. So thanks again to everybody today. Again, like I said, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. Register for part 3 on workforce.com/webinars, and it's titled Creating a Recruiting Strategy That Embraces Change. That's on Thursday, December 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern and 11 a.m. Pacific. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.